Welcome to the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix, where the action began on Friday at twilight in approximately the same conditions as we would have for qualifying and the race. The earlier session on Friday didn't count for much. Many of the teams ran reserve drivers, and of course it was held in much hotter conditions, not really relevant to qualifying in the race. Finding it a bit hard to get fired up about this one so far. Anyway, it may change over the weekend for two reasons. One, because Bahrain as a circuit seems to be becoming a little bit more boring with every year. I think that's because cornering speeds and downforce are increasing. And certainly that lovely section of road, turn 9, 10, is not particularly spectacular now. Everybody seems to be doing it correctly, going around on the outside, touching the marbles almost, and then just breaking into 10 with a nice flat braking zone. And that's because they've all got so much grip now going through 9 at high speed. That wasn't the case 3 or 4 years ago. So that corner is no longer as dramatic as it used to be. And where else is there in Bahrain? It's all about high-speed braking. It was quite funny, I thought, to hear Oliver Behrman saying that he's very confused by the last corner. Good to see a driver admitting that. He's a nice, humble guy, Oliver. Got a lot of time for him. Quite sure what he meant by being confused. I mean, it's dead straight, then it goes right. But I can see what he means in a way, because it's slightly quicker than a 90-degree corner, yet it is a sort of 90-degree corner, if you get my gist. But apart from that, the other reason it's quite difficult to get fired up about the weekend is because, well, if you're a McLaren fan, you'll be very fired up because McLaren-Mercedes at the moment have a massive advantage over the field. Now, Max Verstappen was complaining initially of bouncing. He didn't run in the first session. That was given over to a lot of rookies. And why not? Because the first session in Bahrain is run at a different time of the day to the race, and what we saw in the second session is much more commensurate with qualifying in the race. So that was obviously the time. Although you've got to raise the question here with Alpine, why on earth didn't they run a rookie here instead of at Suzuka, where Jack Doohan, of course, needed all that seat time on a very difficult circuit? The answer, of course, is that Ryo Hirakawa, being Japanese, had to run in Japan and was bringing a lot of money to the team, even though it resulted ultimately in that shunt on Friday afternoon. Nonetheless, I think they still probably covered costs, probably ahead of the game, I would think, Nate Flav. Anyway, getting back to the point, Max didn't run, like several others in the first session. Didn't really matter that much, he thought. When he came out, he had bouncing problems. The car was all over the place. And then when he was doing his long run, he said he didn't really have a great feel from the brake pedal and high speed. So if Max has brilliant brakes tomorrow, it's possible, of course, he's going to be a lot nearer the McLarens. Personally, I doubt it. McLaren's look to be so far ahead of the opposition today. And I've been thinking about an easy, simple way to quantify that. And I came up with these stats. I'm not sure they do the job, but have a look at this. This is the long runs. Everybody was out on the track at the end, all 20 cars doing long runs, as you would around Bahrain, because they do a lot of testing there. They know how to operate in Bahrain. But if you look at the long run summary here, there was a mixture of compounds chosen between the hard, the soft, and the medium. And I put them in the order in which they finished the soft run, so you can see basically where they are in terms of lap time at the moment. And then the final number is the number of total laps they did on the long run. So they all did pretty good long runs. Oscar Piastri, the only one that actually ran 2 different compounds of the quick runners on those long runs, started on the hard, went to the soft. And it looked to me like the sort of benchmark of whether you were going to be quick or not is the 138 barrier with fuel in the car. Of course, we don't know exactly how much fuel each team was running, but because they're all relatively close on lap time, you've got to assume they're all running about the same amount. Well, I'm going to assume that anyway. So Oscar Piastri did 4 laps below 138. It was in the 36s, actually. But let's just keep it to this benchmark here. And 5 on the soft. That's a total of 9. Yep, game over. And Lando Norris stayed on one set. You would expect him, therefore, to do fewer laps under 138, but he still did 5, which is very impressive on the soft tyre. Typical Lando, looking really, really good on the soft tyre. And indeed, just on the consistently long runs. George Russell, 3 on the soft tyre, total of 14 laps. Compare that with Max, 3 on the soft as well, total of 16 laps. But he did have that brake problem, so he said. But we don't know what problems George had as well. But on the face of that, you got to say Red Bull probably, with Max anyway, probably looking like P3 in terms of long run times overall. Charles Leclerc had a reasonably good day, ran the medium for the long runs, so big gap there to Oscar Piastri. Wasn't that quick, didn't get under 138 at all, did 10-lap run, whereas Lewis Hamilton was on the soft, did 1 lap below the 38s on the soft. Again, a 10-lap run. Not very impressive by Lewis, and of course slower than Charles on the soft tyre as well. And having a few moments just sort of locking up and going straight on and just pushing quite hard. He was actually quite quick right at the beginning. He was quickest for a while in the first 20 minutes of the session, but then it just got away from him, as it has at several other circuits this year so far. Kimi Antonelli, very impressive in the other Mercedes, ran the soft tyre like George, didn't get under 138, but then he is a rookie, come on. 15-lap run as well, looked very consistent, having said all that. And Isaac Hadjar, again, phenomenal in the Racing Bulls, to be quicker than, I don't know, Max Verstappen, how's that? But did on the medium tyre, again, no laps under 138. Looked pretty good though, pretty consistent. 13-lap run. Max we've talked about, Lewis we've talked about. Alonso, 7 laps under 138 on the soft tyre, but there I really do question how much fuel they're running in the Aston Martin, because he wasn't particularly quick on the soft tyre on light fuel, and he lost time anyway and had to change the steering wheel early on, things like that. So we'll discount that for the moment, but I put it in there just because, 7 laps under 138, not bad, regardless of how much fuel we're running. Obviously a certain amount of fuel because it was a longish run. And then Yuki Tsunoda not really contributing anything today to Red Bull, I'm afraid. On the medium tyre, so at least Red Bull splitting their options in terms of information. So maybe I need to take a little bit of that back, so they're getting information on the medium tyre, but not particularly quick. 0 laps below 38, as you can see, in an 11-lap run. So on the face of that, McLaren-Mercedes just in another class. And it looked that way. Oscar could throw the car around. He was doing his Oscar thing. It's going to be difficult, I think. If Oscar gets the pole, it'll be difficult for Lando to do anything about it. A little bit like China. And has Lando got enough corners here, places around Bahrain, where his slightly softer touch is going to help him in terms of a lap time? It went away from him in sector 3 on the soft tyre today, and they do enough laps for Oscar to be right on it. So I suppose the most dramatic thing that we could be looking forward to as we go into the weekend is this intra-battle between Oscar and Lando again at McLaren, and how McLaren try to solve that. If they're both on the front row of the grid, what are they going to do? There's a bit of a joke going around the paddock at the moment that although Max doesn't have a number 2 who's up there fighting with him, if you like, he does actually have a number 2. And he's called Oscar Piastri because at the moment he's taking points from Lando Norris, which potentially is still Max's biggest threat in terms of the World Championship. So, that was the sort of joke going up and down the pit lane today. But, it looked like, I'm not surprised going to a circuit like Bahrain. They do a lot of testing. And it's not a great circuit in the way that Suzuka was. Very difficult for a guy like Max to do anything very different from the norm in Bahrain. And it's going to be the same story in Saudi Arabia. They get back to Europe, and then possibly there'll be some upgrades on the Red Bull, which might take them a bit nearer the McLaren. But at the moment, in the middle of this triple header, and the circuit like Bahrain and then Saudi Arabia, very, very difficult to see anybody but McLaren dominating these next 2 Grand Prix. And just a final word on top speeds through the trap. I won't bore you with numbers, but basically the Ferraris, Oliver Behrman, Liam Lawson, Hadjar, Yuki Tsunoda, Lewis Hamilton, relatively quick through the trap. But at the other end of the scale, relatively slow through the trap, Max Verstappen and the 2 McLarens about 6 to 8 kilometers off. So if the 2 McLarens weren't there, you could say, oh, well, there's Max's problem. But McLaren obviously have so much downforce around the back that they can run a downforce setting on the car, which allows them to protect their tyres and do those long runs, as we saw in the stats earlier. So there we are. That's Friday in Bahrain. Bring on the weekend. Let's see what happens there. Thanks for watching, and thanks for those that have sent birthday wishes. Appreciate it. See you tomorrow. The thumbnail in yesterday's video warned you of potential sparks that might be flying in the McLaren team this weekend, but I have to say I never imagined in a million years, I don't think anybody else did either, that Lando Norris would only qualify 6th in a very, very good car for the Bahrain Grand Prix. Oscar Piastri duly took the pole, looking completely relaxed, composed, enjoying himself, throwing the car around, making the odd mistake, recovering, absolutely no problem at all, relaxed, and looking like the race winner that he is. And it's a big problem now for Lando Norris. P6. How did that happen? The biggest issue seemed to be coming out of turn 1 when he had a bit of wheel spin. But actually that began with the lap as he crossed the line, because Yuki Tsunoda was just in front of him, just finishing his lap, having finally got it together in the Red Bull. And Lando got a pretty good tow from Yuki going into turn one. I think this was the issue. Oscar was on track just in front of Lando, and at that point was doing 315 maximum speed in eighth before going into turn one. Lando picked up 3 or 4 kilometers an hour behind Yuki Tsunoda, got it up to 319, and then I guess he was out of sync in terms of what he was going to do with the brakes going into turn one. A corner where you can gain absolutely no time at all by braking late, because it's all about making sure the car's well positioned for the exit of one into two, and then that long straight that follows it thereafter up the hill. And Lando didn't. He fell into the trap of having more speed and then jabbing the brakes while he still had throttle really hard on the brakes. I guess he realized he was going a little bit too quickly at this point. And because of that, he then lost the back end and got into a moment going into one. And that's why you saw the wheel spin coming out of one. So it was all to do with the braking that he did, with the increased speed and the way he hit the brakes. He was still flat on the throttle and he hit the brakes hard. So he had massive overlap for, we're talking milliseconds here. Whereas Oscar Piastri, absolutely superb. I've got to say, 315 top speed. And then before braking, came completely out of the throttle, let the car settle, and then went into the brakes. Case study on how to do it in high-speed braking. I never thought I'd be saying that. Well, I've always said Oscar's that good, and he is going to be the biggest problem Lando has all year. I've been saying that all winter when everybody else is. It seems as if most people have been saying, can Lando take it to the Ferraris? Can he take it to George Russell? Can he take the Max Verstappen? I've been saying the biggest problem for Lando always is going to be Oscar Piastri in that other car. And I've been saying that for over a year now, over 2 years really. So, and here we see it in spades. But nonetheless, you would still have to put your money on Lando Norris and high-speed braking to have more sensitivity. And we've seen that he does it so well, coming out of the brakes and the throttle, going into medium high-speed corners, under pressure, did it so well in Qatar last year and in Silverstone and at Spa. And yet here, picking up that extra kph behind Tsunoda, it just went into panic stations, it seemed. Partly because I guess Oscar had just been systematically quicker, FP3 this morning, and then in the build-up to Q3 as well. And I guess this was the last lap. We've got our new set of tyres. They were on scrub sets in the first run in Q3. And so here it was. And Lando just blew it. He was also slower, I got to say. He was also slower in sectors 2 and 3 than Oscar, but only by slight margins, what kind of you would expect between two teammates in identical cars. The damage was done in that incident going into turn one. And I guess in many ways that probably coloured the way Lando was thinking about the lap anyway. So we shouldn't read too much into the difference thereafter. But yeah, on a circuit which, is fairly straightforward in terms of Lando and Oscar, very, very good racing cars, some enjoyable corners there, not massively demanding. It's astonishing that if the final results, Lando Norris is now P6 and Oscar Piastri P1. I said yesterday the sort of pervading joke in the pit lane was that Oscar is emerging as a great number 2 to Max Verstappen. Well, I think we have to revise that very quickly and say Oscar is emerging as a major, major championship threat now. And this is bad news for Lando Norris. To have a weekend like this on a straightforward circuit, to be blown away by Oscar like this is a huge, huge thing. That was the biggest story of qualifying by a mile, in my opinion. And it does mean now that it's pretty plain sailing for Oscar Piastri tomorrow. George Russell, not to demean him in any ways, but there's no way that Mercedes is going to be as quick as a McLaren-Mercedes over the Grand Prix distance in Bahrain. We saw that in full tanks yesterday. And Mercedes were the only team to run 2 new sets in that final Q3 part of qualifying, so they had the feel of the tyres. George had the feel of the tyres. Really, really good lap. I'm sure he got the absolute maximum from the car, but the difference was, well, the difference between the McLaren and the Mercedes on a new set of tyres on one lap, and it's about 0.2 of a second, which is a lot over one lap. So yeah, Oscar Piastri looking in incredibly good shape now to win the Bahrain Grand Prix. George Russell P2, Charles Leclerc, another classy performance, P3 for Ferrari. Excellent job again. I say that really in the context of where Lewis Hamilton was. Again, putting himself under pressure by running wide, having an oversteer moment going into turn 13 on the first run, admittedly on a scrub set of Q3, losing the back end and then correcting that, but in so doing, running out of road and getting that lap time deleted. And so going into the last couple of minutes of Q3, he had no time on the board and he went out, and obviously then he drove relatively conservatively, and he will start only P9 as a result. So another strong performance from Charles Leclerc against Lewis Hamilton, and Ferrari not too far away from Mercedes. Difficult to see Charles taking it to George tomorrow, but I'm sure he'll be relatively near, and it could come down to strategy. It could come down to management of tyres, and we saw how well Charles can do that in Suzuka. But then again, George does too, so very good performance from both of those. Kimi Antonelli, excellent as well in the other Mercedes. He also had a time deleted at the beginning of that first Q3 phase, but unlike Lewis, he then put his head down and did the time, got out early and did the time on a new set of tyres. To be only 0.2 slower than George Russell, no disgrace in that whatsoever. So very, very good lap by Antonelli. And although he did run a bit wide through the 9-10 section on scrub tyres on the new set of softs, he was absolutely superb through 9 and 10. I would say as good as anybody through there. But with the new track surface, as I say, and with more downforce on the cars these days, 9-10 is nothing like as, I was going to say demanding, but it's more discerning, I guess, than it used to be. But now it's not. But a guy like Kimi Antonelli is still relishing in that part of the track. And you may see him doing some nice passes tomorrow on that little bit of straight between turns 10 and 11. Yes, it's a DRS area, but in order really to get the pass, you've got to force the guy in front into an error. And the way he's going through 9 and 10 at the moment, Antonelli is going to be in a good position to do that, I think. And then there was Pierre Gasly, P5 for Alpine. And we shouldn't forget Jack Doohan either, P11 for Alpine. Really, really quick in Q1, Q2. Unlucky, really, not to get into Q3. His tyres went off right at the end of his lap. But considering where Jack's coming from and the pressure that's on him, really good performance from Jack, but excellent, stellar from Pierre Gasly. I've been singing his praises for many months now. And I think in a live stream not so long ago, somebody said, who would you put as the top 5 quickest drivers for one lap? And I definitely included Pierre Gasly in that. And what a lap he did. Absolutely brilliant. So Alpine coming from a horrendous weekend right into the forefront. Now, the big question, of course, is whether Pierre can keep that up in a race distance. It's relatively easy to overtake in Bahrain with all the DRS zones and the way that the circuit is. It's nothing like Suzuka, for example. So there's half a chance that he isn't going to be able to hold that position. But nonetheless, statement made by Pierre Gasly. Very, very good. Then there was Lando Norris in P6, as I say, followed by, if you please, Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion in the Red Bull RB21, winner of the Japanese Grand Prix, and very, very lucky to get out of Q1. The braking problem did continue overnight. I speculated that it might. I hoped, of course, from their point of view that they would be able to do something. Red Bull normally are. It seems odd that there is this braking issue with the car. They've never had one as bad as this. And the way Max talks, it's a really, really bad feeling in the pedal that he's got. And going into Q1, he said the car was undrivable. He had a massive lockup going into the last corner, came straight back into the pits, had to get out right at the end, new set of tyres, and got into Q2. But similar story in Q2 and similar story in Q3. Just never, ever liked the car and never looked like being in the top 3 on this occasion. I mean, what a difference, 6 days makes. But we did say, Suzuka is going to be a one-off because there aren't many circuits like that on the calendar now where a guy like Max can do what he did. But having said that, if he'd had that same brake problem in Japan, he wouldn't have won Japan either. So a really, really curious, odd thing going on at Red Bull that Max couldn't get. They couldn't overnight fix the problem, let alone fix it after FP3 this morning. So Max, fingers crossed, I guess, that the car will be sorted for race day. But from where he is, P7, it's not going to be easy for him at all, even if they do get the car right. So it'll be interesting to see what parts they change on the Red Bull in Parc Fermé overnight, under the control of Joe Bauer, of course. Carlos Sainz, finally got it together. Very, very good to see that. Alex Albon just made it through into Q2. He was P15 in Q1, but then didn't get out of Q2. But Carlos Sainz did. Really good. P8 for Carlos Sainz in the Williams. His best performance so far, starting to look like the old Carlos Sainz. Lewis Hamilton, as I say, a disappointing 9th. And Yuki Tsunoda made the top 10 in the other Red Bull. But what a performance. 7th and 10th for Red Bull. That's got to be one of the worst performances ever. Well, for a long time anyway. The statisticians get involved in that one. So not a good day, not a good weekend so far for Red Bull, and difficult to see how they can make it a lot better tomorrow. Other results, Jack Doohan, I've said P11, really good for him after what he's been going through. Isaac Hadjar, again, quick in the Racing Bulls, much quicker than Liam Lawson, who didn't get out of Q1, whereas Isaac was on the bubble in terms of maybe getting into Q3, another good performance. Fernando Alonso in the very, very slow, got to say that now, use that word, Aston Martin. He was congratulating the team on the great job they did and how they got the most from the car. I think that was his way of saying nobody else could have done a better job in that Aston than I have. But I mean, what are Aston Martin doing? Just the amount of money they've got, the facilities they've got, the personnel they've got. It just sounds a bit like BAR, doesn't it? All those great people, put them all together and nothing ever happens. Anyway, I'm sure they'll eventually get it together. Money buys everything. And of course, the Adrian Newey car is something to look forward to for next year. Esteban Ocon had a big shunt coming out of turn 2, got all tangled up out of 2, crashed into the outside of 2. Interesting, ironic, whatever, use whatever word you like, but of course it was a Haas that Romain Grosjean put into the guardrail on the inside coming out of 2 when he touched another car. And now another Haas driver at the same place where nobody else ever seems to have a shunt at all. Isn't that bizarre? That was sort of underlining a very poor day. After a great day in Japan, very poor day for Haas Ferrari because Oliver Behrman was slowest of all. So Oscar Piastri, not only on the pole, but on the pole 5 grid places ahead of his teammate Lando Norris. That's a significant thing. I mean, even if he wasn't on the pole, if he was 5 places ahead of Lando Norris, that's game done for Oscar Piastri. But he's on the pole, he's got a clear track ahead of him, and Lando's in the middle of the crud going into turn 1. So yeah, Oscar Piastri, chapeau to you. Very good job. Just went out there. He's a racing driver, drove elegantly, drove fast, drove with lots of car control, threw the car around, showed how drivable it was. Whereas Lando, just weird braking it after picking up that speed behind Yuki Tsunoda. I don't know. But I just can't imagine Lando would have. I don't know what's going on. I just can't imagine the Lando of 2 or 3 years ago when he looked a little bit more rough and ready out of the car as well, not quite so polished with social media and everything else. I don't think he would have been fazed by that. But on this occasion, bizarre to see the way he was braking after that with his increased speed he had going into turn 1. Anyway, wonder what the McLaren engineers will have to say about that one. Not very much, I would imagine. So back to Bahrain and the Grand Prix tomorrow under lights. Should be spectacular. The cars look shiny and new and big and fast under the lights in the desert of Bahrain. Oscar Piastri on the top of the heap looking superb in the McLaren-Mercedes in what is effectively McLaren's home Grand Prix given the Bahraini ownership of that team. Anyway, we'll see what happens tomorrow. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja and to REC Watches. Take care. See you then. 3 DRS zones in Bahrain, so it was always frenetic, always breathless. But despite all that, there was a blanket of tranquility if you looked at the front of the race. You didn't see it very often on the TV cameras, but out there, controlling the race, incredible consistency on a pace that was well below his limit, that is for sure. Oscar Piastri won the Bahrain Grand Prix with complete ease. Superb performance all day by the team and by Oscar. I think his only problem was when they said, Oscar, don't forget to drink. And he said, well, if I had a drink bottle, I would, mate, if I could get some water out of it. Just a fabulous drive to back up the pole position he had yesterday. Lando Norris finished 3rd eventually in the other McLaren. Good drive from P6, from a disappointing P6, when he's qualifying where he did. Helped in the initial launch by both Ferraris deciding to start on medium tyres, which gave all the cars around them an instant advantage because they were all on the soft tyre. But having said that, Lando blew it completely by stopping in the correct box for the start, but then creeping forward and braking again just before the red lights came on, which earned him a 5-second penalty. Quite a lenient penalty, really, considering the severity of his mistake. This wasn't just coming over the box by a couple of centimetres. This was going forward and then stopping and possibly getting an advantage. Anyway, 5 seconds is what he got. That was taken out of the first pit stop. He did well. He passed a lot of cars. He spent a lot of time, perhaps too much time, behind some cars, Charles Leclerc particularly. And there was one moment when he had to give a position back to Charles. There was a lot of late braking into turn 1, a lot of running wide into turn 1. This is Lando we're talking about still. Instead of just thinking that the pass is probably going to be on the DRS straight between turns 3 and 4. But he did a lot of passing into 4 as well. And he did a great pass eventually on Charles Leclerc on the outside of turn 4 to take P3. But by then he was never, ever in a strong position to catch George Russell in the closing phase of the race. And for me, George Russell's drive was one of the best I've seen for a long, long time in a car that was not as good as the McLaren. And in the final pit stops, induced by a safety car, McLaren had the right tyre combination from the start. They started on the soft, then they went to two sets of mediums, a second set of mediums at the safety car. No other team had that. Everybody else had to compromise because they'd run out of tyres by then. Some went to hard, some went to soft. In Mercedes' case, they went to soft on George's car. And it was a big ask. And of course, by the last 5 laps, George had lost his soft tyre grip and advantage, any advantage he had at all. Lando was right behind him in a better car with DRS, with better grip on the medium tyre. And on top of all that, George was having to deal with a dash problem, a sensor problem, an electronic problem, which manifested itself first in the timing, where he's disappeared from the screens. And then from George's point of view, he started to lose gears as well. Big panic. He went into a default mode, got the gears back, no problem. Made the great comment, so long as the steering wheel doesn't fall off, I'm okay. But he was having to think about this. And at one point in getting the problem solved, it looks as if Mercedes had to open the DRS in a non-DRS area, or maybe they just caught the end of it when it was still open, or the beginning of it. And as I speak, there is a missive from the FIA demanding that George and a team representative go to the stewards because the DRS was open and in an area where it shouldn't have been. If he does lose P2, I think that'll be incredibly unjust for a number of reasons. One, he was just trying to solve the problem. 2, it didn't give him any advantage anyway. 3, the DRS advantage throughout this battle was always with Lando Norris because he was behind George. And despite that, he didn't get past George. Unbelievably precise and effective driving by George in defence in a way I've never seen him drive that well in defence before. Just absolutely superb. Never put a wheel out of line in the places where it was late braking or he had to get the car absolutely right on a turn-in position, turn-in point. And yeah, if he loses that place, then I don't like DRS anyway, but I will have absolutely lost any respect I had for DRS completely, because this is completely unjust if he does go. Just on the point of DRS, I still maintain that the racing today would have been just as good without DRS. These cars develop really good toes. You can run quite close to the car in front in dirty air. But more importantly, if you do a very good job down the hill out of turn 4 and a very good job through turns 9 and 10, you deserve to be able to hold that position going down that back straight into turn 11. You don't deserve to have a guy suddenly just sit there, get the DRS advantage and pass. That's not motor racing, and I've always maintained that. And I just think this was a classic example of why we don't need DRS anymore. The whole point of these cars is that they were easier to overtake. And for me, it was, and just to reiterate the point, if George loses P2 because of this ridiculous DRS issue, then there's no justice in the world, in my opinion. Anyway, as it is, he's currently P2 on the road. I suspect he is going to get penalised, but Lando Norris then will finish second. Still beaten by his teammate, though. And if you think about McLaren, first 4 races, 2 wins for Oscar Piastri now. 2 very, very impressive wins by Oscar Piastri. So if you're Lando Norris, you come away thinking after Bahrain, lucky to get P2 there, or P3, whatever it's going to be, after what I did in qualifying. And he never looked as impressive as Oscar during the race either. Never. And that is now a real thing for Lando Norris. As I've been saying from day one, the biggest problem for Lando in winning the World Championship this year, in what is unquestionably the best car, is beating his teammate. It's not everybody else, it's beating his teammate. And just as a final comment about the George Russell, Lando Norris battle, when they were behind the safety car, just about to restart, Lando's race engineer, always giving Lando as much encouragement as he can, said, as I guess is now predictable, said, George is on the soft tyre and he's already saying that it's going to be really difficult to make it through to the finish with any sort of consistent speed, Lando. The pace is with you, you've got the right tyre. In which normally a driver would reply, okay, great, gotcha, understood, or whatever they want to say. And but Lando said, as classic Lando, almost talking himself out of P3, well, I don't think that's right. I think the soft tyre was mega. I think he's on good tyres. He's great tyre. With no rejoinder from the engineer, of course. Absolutely superb from Lando. And maybe he did talk himself out of it. Maybe he kept thinking, yeah, those soft tyres, just amazing. Anyway, P4, P5 Ferrari. No match on the hard tyre at the end of the race for Lando Norris in the case of Charles Leclerc, but wasn't he good? Charles Leclerc over-delivering in that car again. Just a class act. Superb to watch. Lando all over him after the restart for I don't know how many laps. At one point, he had to give position back, and then they were back and forth. But eventually, he got him, as he would, because he just had more grip and he's in a better car. So Charles finished fourth, long way ahead of Lewis Hamilton, who drove pretty well. Got to say, it was a much more positive day for Lewis. He would have enjoyed it, did quite a lot of overtaking on the same strategy as Charles, which kind of was all about we don't have enough tyres to do the right strategy, but he was okay. Finished fifth, long way behind. Charles was as I say, was the quicker driver, but for Lewis it wasn't a completely depressing day as we've had on a couple of occasions already this year for him. So that'll be more of a positive takeaway for Lewis Hamilton going into Saudi Arabia. And then there was Max Verstappen, P6 in the Red Bull, which on the grid, you thought maybe all these changes they made overnight under the supervision of the FIA and Parc Fermé have worked, because he didn't seem to be complaining about the brakes. He was talking about, do they want more flap? And his own response was, well, yeah, the car's not going into corners, but I got flick oversteer as well, so I don't want more front flap either. I guess that was the story. And then on top of that, he did say quite early on in the race, I can't stop the car. So a really, really difficult 3 days for Max Verstappen. Very unusual for Red Bull to have some sort of issue like this. And it seems to be some sort of braking issue. They changed a lot overnight, sensors, brake friction material, all that sort of stuff. Nothing seemed to make any difference. And they can't get on top of that. And as well, 2 slow pit stops for Max Verstappen. Let me repeat that. Red Bull making 2 slow pit stops for Max Verstappen. I don't think that's ever happened. 2 stops in one race, both of them disastrous. The first was a problem with the signal light, where the driver has to wait until he sees that it's clear on the light, and the light, something went wrong with the lighting system, and Max had to wait a couple of seconds in addition. And then the right front jammed as well. Interesting, isn't it? Jonathan Wheatley is now at Sauber, and you wonder whether there's a bit of an effect here of Jonathan Wheatley. I've always found Jonathan a classic sort of English team manager type guy, very easy to talk to, friendly when nothing's going on. But the minute he's focused on something, he's very, very sharp, very, very disciplined. And I wonder whether that's something that Red Bull are now missing, because he's been there for many years, or was there for many years, and the pit work at Red Bull was always second to none. Now it looks sloppy. Well, it was sloppy in Bahrain, no doubt about it, and Max will not be pleased about that at all. Driving a car that bad, every tenth of a second matters, and when you blow all that time in 2 basic pit stop mistakes like that, then it's really bad. And from the second one, he rejoined in 20th place. Can you believe? Max Verstappen, winner of the Japanese Grand Prix, rejoining after his second pit stop, which was a bit early, got to say, because they put him on the hard tyre from the soft at the start, because the hard just went nowhere. So they brought him in relatively early to put him on a set of mediums. But even so, down to P20 mid-race. Of course, that didn't help, because not long afterwards, the safety car came out. So from Max's point of view, stopping as he did to get onto the medium when a lot of other teams didn't have any mediums, and he presumably had some sort of advantage going into the back end of the race on that. It didn't really work for him with track position, because the safety car then brought all the leaders in anyway. Admittedly, only McLaren went to mediums, but the Red Bull was so bad, he could do very little about Esteban Ocon in the Haas Ferrari, and he couldn't pass Pierre Gasly in the Alpine until the last couple of laps, when Pierre really started to lose grip on the hard tyres. He'd driven really well throughout the race in the Alpine, and it was reliable too, mechanically reliable. And we didn't see it on TV because there's so much going on, but beautiful pass by Max. And he did exactly what Lando hadn't been doing. He was right on him through turns 1 and 2, just sitting there, not trying to do anything. And then he perfectly timed the pass at the end of the straight and got him into 4 on the last lap, as Oscar Piastri was basically taking the checkered flag. And Max took P6. So for a driver who's been through quite a lot, and he's won a few world championships, and the car wasn't very good today, he's still hungry for P6 instead of P7. That's a good sign for all the Verstappen fans out there, I think. Very good last lap by Max. Aforementioned Esteban Ocon did very well to score points for Haas Ferrari. And Yuki Tsunoda did too in the other Red Bull. He was kind of in the midfield all the time, being running into others. It was like that in the midfield in Bahrain. It always is on these DRS circuits like that, because they're all in DRS trains, the tyres are going off. And in this occasion, most of the cars were all on different strategies at any given moment, due to some teams having not enough mediums, some teams only having softs and things like that. So there was a lot of speed differential going on, a lot of tyres running out of grip in braking areas, and quite a lot of nerfing. Carlos Sainz and Liam Lawson both got penalties for hitting other cars, and a lot of that going on. And Yuki found himself in the middle of most of that, as did Oliver Burman, but he kept himself very, very clean, and finished 10th for the second race in a row. Oliver Behrman 10th in the other Haas Ferrari. Excellent performance by him, excellent drive, particularly as he had a lot of pressure in the closing laps from Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes, who was super quick. I mean, he wasn't that far behind George in qualifying. And in the race, he was right up there in the early stages, ahead of guys like Max Verstappen, just to name but one. But here he couldn't get past Oliver Behrman. Really, really good drive by Behrman. And what was he doing down there behind him, though? Well, what happened was he was the only driver in this situation. But like Max, he'd stopped for tyres just before the safety car. And he'd gone to soft tyres. And I guess Mercedes thought, this is a big ask to get him through to the finish on this set of softs. So we'll bring him in again, even though they're only about 5 laps old. And they did. So he made 3 stops. And because of that, it dropped into the midfield crud. I think that had they not done that, I think he would have been good enough to brought the car home. I mean, at the end of the day, given the pressure he was under and all the other dramas going on, George Russell still finished second on the road on a set of softs. So Kimi for sure could have got a result too. Should have been definitely in the top 10, in the high top 10 probably. But because of that, it has to come under the heading, I think, of a Mercedes strategy error. Because of that, bringing him in again, he was right down there, and there's nothing he could do. DRS train, really difficult. Again, makes my point about DRS, doesn't it? What is the point of it? All these DRS trains. If there was no DRS, a guy like Antonelli would definitely have been able to pull off more passes than with DRS, because when you got a DRS train, of course, it neutralizes everything. I'm not the first person to have said that, but it's so ridiculous in this era in which we're now racing. These cars supposedly easier to overtake anyway. Why we have DRS? And if you really want to put it in perspective, of course, Jack Doohan wouldn't have had the shunt that he had in Japan if it wasn't for DRS. Anyway, back to Bahrain. I keep looking at my phone to see if a decision has come in from the FIA about George Russell. It hasn't yet. Hoping. Meanwhile, infringements for Carlos Sainz and for Liam Lawson causing accidents. As I say, there was a lot of that going on in the midfield in Bahrain in those sort of DRS trains. And it's a case of DRS almost doubling back on itself and making it impossible to overtake. I won't go on about it, but I am going to do a piece about DRS soon and a video, so watch this space on that one. So big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to TrackNinja, and of course to REC Watchers for their support of this channel, without whom we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. And thanks to you for watching. Back again next week, Saudi Arabia. Guess what? Another DRS race with lots of straights and overtaking. Can't wait. See you then. After we recorded that video, came the news from the FIA that, surprisingly, given the way things normally go in Formula One, George Russell would not be penalised for that very small DRS infringement. So his second place stands, and a very well earned second place it was too.